Whether you're a seasoned Banksy collector or you're buying your first print, here is everything that you need to know about buying a Banksy print. So in terms of Banksy's art market, it's really interesting because when he started in the early 1990s, this was super counterculture, very subversive, illegal. He had a small kind of cult following who started collecting his works. But when they first were released, these were a couple of £100, £50 to £100, you know, really not huge sums that we see today. And then from the 90s into the early noughties, as these, you know, shows began to develop, big museum shows, and of course Banksy's big stunts, the institution started turning, you know, from turning against Banksy and sort of, you know, not sort of taking his art very seriously, to absolutely street art becoming part of the contemporary art lexicon. And Banksy's works, we're seeing them at auctions and the prices rise, you know, meteorically over the last sort of 20 years. I think since the pandemic, where we saw kind of crazy prices, there has been a bit of a market correction since then. But we have obviously seen, you know, fantastic auction results for Banksy's works, originals going for over 10 million. So everyone knows that, you know, Banksy is an incredible sort of PR stuntman, and there's been some very significant moments, I think, in his career that have not led only to the growth of the popularity, but also the growth in those prices as well in his market. And he's done some amazing projects throughout this time. I think it's worth noting, for example, the New York Residency, Disneyland, the Waldorf Hotel in Bethlehem. And I think probably the most poignant moment within the kind of art world will be the moment of the shredding. So the shredding of the girl with balloon that turned that artwork into what is now known as Love is in the Bin. I think it's interesting to see Banksy, to see where his market is and to see where the sort of trend has gone over the last sort of couple of years, because it was sort of, you know, since the late 1990s, it's been quite steady, kind of going upwards. And then we saw this crazy meteoric spike in popularity and prices during the pandemic. So in kind of 2021, 2022, these prices just, you know, kind of went crazy. We have seen a bit of a market correction since then, and we're seeing a little bit of kind of plateauing of the prices and the confidence of the market picking up with events such as his exhibition Cut and Run in Glasgow, which is in the summer of 2023. I often get asked, you know, which Banksy's the best investment? And I think it's such a tricky question to answer. And the reason why is because when it comes to buying artwork, you should always invest in what you love. So it should be a piece that really speaks to you. And I think the great thing about Banksy is that in his kind of subversive nature or sort of anti-establishment nature, there's always one or two pieces that really, really seem to resonate with that person. So when it comes to buying something for kind of a great investment, I think, of course, there's always opportunities to look at what your budget is and price point, but always, always, always go for something that you love. In terms of Banksy's most popular prints, it does really change over time. That being said, there are a couple, I think, that are worth mentioning. For example, Love is in the Air, which depicts a young male throwing what looks like potentially a weapon, but it's actually a sort of bunch of flowers. And really the message at heart is a promotion of peace. And we can see this work. It was a really, really famous piece on the West Bank wall. And I think those in situ artworks, when they're sort of presented as a print, can often, you know, rise in popularity. There are other pieces, however, for example, Jack and Jill, which was actually never a work that was a street work. It was just released as a print. And that is also a very interesting comment on society and potentially about the innocence of children, another incredibly popular print. So although they do change over time, I think the wonderful thing about a lot of Banksy's messages are that they are, you know, promotion of peace, anti-violence, and often there's also the sort of tongue-in-cheek messaging, which, you know, remains very humorous. And I think people really resonate with a number of his works. So a number of people come to asking about the pricing for Banksy's originals and limited edition prints and how they compare. The originals, they can be a couple of £1,000,000, whereas the limited edition prints can start from a few thousand and go up to hundreds of thousands. So many people ask about the signed versus the unsigned Banksy prints. So the signed prints are usually a smaller selection, often 100 to 150 within an edition, and the unsigned tend to be a larger selection, 500, 600, for example. I think both have wonderful qualities, of course, to them. It's lovely to have the signature if you can, and they do tend to come at a slightly higher price. That being said, the most important thing is that they have their pest control certificate of authenticity as well. If you already own a Banksy print, or if you've recently purchased one, condition, as you know, is incredibly important when buying and when selling a print. So it's really important to know what to do. If you are deciding to hang the work on your wall, then I would absolutely recommend that you go ahead with conservation standard framing. If it's a mount, that it's acid free, and if you're using glass, that it's as high anti-UV as possible, and of course conservation standard in general for framing. If you're deciding not to frame the piece, then I would recommend storing it flat in a cool, dark space, or potentially even looking at art storage. If you're in the market for a Banksy print, where can you go to buy it? And I think that's a question that we get a lot, what the different avenues of purchase are. So in terms of what we call primary market, so this means the first purchase from Banksy himself, this is usually done via pest control through either their websites such as GDP or Banksy pop-ups. In the secondary market, which is the sale after that initial sale, you can find works from auctions, from galleries, and of course from private sales, like for example through us at My Art Broker.